Elaine Whittaker moved through the echoing halls of Ashgrove Hall with a heaviness in her step. Morning light bled through the stained-glass windows above the front door, casting fragmented reds and blues across the grand entryway. The air inside was cold, always colder than outside, as if the old house had its own memories it refused to thaw. She sipped her lukewarm coffee and paused at the foot of the staircase, listening. Tick, tick, tick. The grandfather clock had resumed its pendulum rhythm after stalling during the last storm. A comforting sound. The only one. It had been 5 months since she'd returned home following her divorce. Her therapist had suggested familiar ground to heal. But familiarity had sharp edges. Everything in Ashgrove Hall looked the same as it had when she was a teenager, but nothing felt the same. Not her bedroom, not her father's stern silences, not her mother's distracted tenderness. And definitely not the way her skin crawled in certain hallways at night. That morning, her father Charles had retreated into the study to finish cataloguing the family's antique collection for their insurance renewal. He'd been meticulous about it ever since his heart scare last spring. Her mother, Margaret, was in the parlor knitting with surgical precision, a soft instrumental record playing beside her. Elaine leaned into the kitchen, where Mrs. Dobbins, the housekeeper of 30 years, wiped down the counter in rhythmic circles. Leo Hartley, the part-time groundskeeper, had just finished loading firewood onto the porch and gave Elaine a tight nod as he passed the window. Everything seemed perfectly mundane, until the scream. Charles! Elaine's cup shattered on the floor as she bolted toward the study. She found him standing in front of the glass display cabinet, ghost pale, clutching the desk with one hand, the other pointing shakily at the empty shelves. Elaine, the dagger, the astrolabe, they're gone. Her mother ran in behind her, one hand over her mouth. Oh my God! What happened? Elaine stared at the shattered lock on the cabinet door. The Ottoman dagger, an emerald-encrusted relic from the 18th century, was missing. So was the astrolabe, a priceless brass artifact from the early scientific era. The violin with the royal provenance. Even the William Blake sketch. Gone. Elaine gently sat her father down in the leather chair and called the police. Detective Hugo Fenley arrived within the hour, a tall, clean-shaven man with narrow eyes and a notebook he didn't seem to look at. He moved through the study with a deliberate grace, examining every angle, photographing the broken cabinet, and inspecting the lock mechanism. "No signs of forced entry," he murmured. "No scratches on the front door, windows all locked from the inside. It doesn't look like an outside job." Margaret frowned. "Then who could have?" "Someone who knew what to take," Fenley said, turning, "and where it was kept." Elaine exchanged a glance with her father. Leo stood in the hallway, cap in hand, glancing uncomfortably around the room. Mrs. Dobbins hovered behind him, twisting a dish rag. Elaine tried not to jump to conclusions, but she couldn't shake the unease bubbling up in her chest. Fenley turned to her. "Anyone outside the family been inside this study in the last few weeks?" Elaine hesitated. "The cleaning staff vacuum, dust. Leo sometimes brings in logs when the fireplace is lit. But the cabinet, only my father ever touches it." The detective nodded. "It's been targeted. These weren't impulse thefts. Whoever did this knows antiques." Elaine followed him into the hallway where they passed the rows of family portraits. Generations of Whittakers stared down at them from gilded frames, men in cravats and women in lace, a bloodline wrapped in wealth and old-world pride. In the days that followed, the tension in the house became suffocating. Fenley had the staff questioned. Fingerprints were lifted, logs checked. Nothing definitive came back. Then a lead surfaced. A pawnshop in Leeds reported that someone had made inquiries about a rare Ottoman dagger. The description was nearly identical. The man didn't sell anything, just asked about valuation. But the clerk remembered his car, a green Land Rover with a faded left tail light. Elaine froze when Fenley told her, "My brother Tobias owns a green Land Rover." "Where is he now?" "Abroad. Germany. He hasn't been home in months." "Anyone else use the car?" Elaine blinked. "Not that I." But her stomach dropped. Someone had borrowed it. Someone trusted. Someone close. That night, she walked into her father's study alone. The cabinet still sat there, gaping and hollow. She opened a side drawer on the desk. Inside, tucked under papers, was a velvet ring pouch. She opened it, and found her mother's signet ring. Elaine's breath caught. Margaret never took it off. Elaine stood in the middle of the darkened study, the signet ring cold in her hand. She tried to reason it out. Maybe Margaret had taken it off for cleaning or to bake. But she knew her mother. Margaret Whittaker was a woman of exacting routines, of silk gloves and pearl clasps. That ring had adorned her hand every day for over 30 years. It was her wedding band's twin in symbolism. So why was it tucked away in a drawer in the middle of a crime scene? The next morning, Elaine approached her mother during breakfast. The table was set as always, silver cutlery gleaming, eggs perfectly runny, toast sliced into even halves. Charles sipped his tea in silence, his pride bruised and his thoughts unreachable. "Mother," Elaine said casually, "you're not wearing your ring." Margaret didn't look up. "Oh, I must have left it upstairs." "Are you sure?" Margaret blinked, and for a brief moment her composure cracked, just slightly. A flicker of something Elaine couldn't name. "Yes, dear," she said smoothly. "I'll look for it after breakfast." Elaine nodded, but her throat had already tightened. She excused herself from the table and found Detective Fenley in the hallway, leafing through a leather-bound catalogue of Charles's collection. "I think you should consider another suspect," she said under her breath. "My cousin, Felix." Fenley raised an eyebrow. "He was here 2 weeks ago. For lunch. Said he was between clients, which usually means broke. He used to run an antique shop, but it went under." "Was he left alone at any point?" "Yes. My mother gave him a tour while father and I were in the garden. She said he admired the study's display." Fenley shut the book. "That's a name worth checking." Later that day, Elaine texted Tobias overseas. "Did you lend your Land Rover to anyone recently?" He replied a few minutes later. "Felix. For a day or two. Said he needed to run errands around the county." "Why?" Elaine's heart sank. That evening, the detective called with an update. A second pawnshop in Sheffield confirmed they acquired an antique astrolabe. Seller gave a false name, but we got him on CCTV. Partial profile. Elaine held her breath. Fenley sent her the still. It wasn't crystal clear, but it didn't need to be. It was Felix. The grainy image showed him in a hoodie, head lowered, but Elaine recognized the slouch in his posture, the crooked nose, the sideburns. Her cousin, Margaret's nephew, once the charming black sheep of family gatherings. Now a confirmed thief. "He's using your family's collection like a personal ATM," Fenley muttered. He knew exactly what to take and where to fence it. Elaine struggled to stay calm. "My mother vouched for him. She knew he was here. She walked him through the house. You think she's involved?" "I don't know. I think she wanted to believe he could be trusted." But the pieces weren't aligning neatly. Elaine felt as though she was staring at a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces had been shaved at the corners to fit. That night, she did something she hadn't done in years. She followed her mother. Margaret often had a glass of sherry after dinner, then retired upstairs with a book. But that night, she stopped in the study. Elaine watched from the hallway shadows as her mother knelt beside the fireplace, reached behind the log rack, and pulled out a flat black case. Elaine froze. Margaret opened the case, examined something inside, and closed it again. Then she tucked it beneath the floorboard behind the hearth. Elaine waited until the house was dark, then crept into the study. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the floorboard. Inside the case was the violin, the one that had supposedly been stolen, the one worth nearly £100,000. Elaine's mind raced. Why had her mother hidden it? Why leave the rest to be taken and pawned? And suddenly, a chilling possibility struck her. This wasn't just theft. It was insurance fraud. Margaret had hidden the most sentimental piece to preserve it, and let the others go. Or worse, collaborated with Felix. It was a betrayal of the entire family's trust, and it was unraveling fast. She replaced the floorboard and backed out of the room like a ghost, her heart slamming in her chest. The next morning, she made a choice. She called Detective Fenley and said, "I need to show you something." Detective Fenley stood in the study with his hands behind his back, surveying the fireplace like it had personally insulted him. Elaine knelt beside the hearth and pried up the floorboard. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, and when she lifted the violin case into the open, she could almost hear her mother's breath catching, though Margaret wasn't in the room. Fenley opened the case slowly. The violin rested inside, cushioned in velvet. A note was folded in the corner of the lid. Elaine leaned closer as he unfolded it. It was Margaret's handwriting. "Keep this safe. It's the only one that matters." Fenley exhaled. So she knew. She didn't just discover it missing and panic. She planned this. Elaine sat on the nearby ottoman, wringing her hands. I think she did it to protect something. Or someone. Fenley looked at her. If that's true, she's on the wrong side of the law. You understand that? Elaine nodded. I want the truth more than I want to protect what's left of a lie. That afternoon, Margaret was asked to come to the local station for questioning. She wore a deep green scarf, hair pinned, eyes unreadable. Elaine accompanied her, sitting outside the room as Fenley gently but firmly probed. Inside, Margaret didn't resist, didn't deny. "Yes," she said, "I moved the violin. I didn't steal the others. I didn't sell them. I just didn't want all of it to disappear." "Why not report the theft to the police immediately?" Fenley asked. "Because then the insurance wouldn't cover it. I knew Felix had been poking around. I knew what he was after. So I made a decision. A decision to let him take the most valuable parts of your husband's legacy?" Margaret's voice tightened. "No. A decision to let him believe I was cooperating, so I could get ahead of him. Charles would never willingly sell those things. He'd rather die in debt." "Were you in debt?" She hesitated. "Yes," she admitted. "Deep. Medical bills. Property tax. Tobias needed money for school last year, and Charles wouldn't hear of selling any part of the collection. So I borrowed, from people I shouldn't have. Felix came sniffing around, asking questions about appraisals. I was cornered. You gave him information. I let him see the cabinet. I told him about the insurance renewal, hoping he'd take only what he needed and disappear. But I never expected him to sell the pieces so quickly. He lied to me." Margaret sat back, weary. I know what I did. I betrayed my husband's trust. But I didn't want my children to inherit a ruin. Fenley scribbled notes in silence, then slid a photo across the table. Felix's blurry pawnshop still. Is this the man you spoke with? Margaret looked at it for a long moment and nodded. Yes, that's him. When Elaine saw her mother emerge from the interrogation room, she expected fury or shame. Instead, Margaret looked lighter, as if a storm had passed. I suppose now it's all out, she said quietly. You think I'm a villain. Elaine took her arm. No, but I think you crossed a line trying to save us, and someone needs to answer for the damage done. That night, Fenley and his team traced Felix's last known address to a rented cottage on the edge of the Peak District. They coordinated with local police and surrounded the home. Inside, they found the astrolabe, wrapped in towels beneath the bed. The Ottoman dagger was tucked in a shoebox behind the fridge. The William Blake sketch was under a stack of takeaway menus. Felix was arrested without incident. His face was gaunt, stubbled, eyes bloodshot. The quiet charisma from family reunions had long since curdled into something bitter. He said little beyond a muttered, "It was just stuff. Old junk. I needed to live." At the station, the case was officially logged. Multiple counts of burglary, fraud, possession of stolen property, and conspiracy. His bail was denied. Margaret was released under police caution. Her cooperation weighed against her deception. Elaine watched it all unfold like someone reading the final chapter of a book that once felt endless. When she returned to Ashgrove Hall, the air was different. Quiet. Not peaceful. Just waiting. She walked into the study, opened the floorboard, and stared at the violin case. It still rested there, silent, untouched. She didn't put it back. She placed it on the cabinet shelf, even with the others. A small gesture, a promise to bring things into the light again. 2 weeks later, Ashgrove Hall felt like a house holding its breath. The collection, piece by piece, returned under police escort, wrapped in evidence bags, some scratched, some devalued by exposure. The violin had survived intact, but the astrolabe bore a fresh dent. The Ottoman dagger had been slightly cleaned, perhaps to scrub off fingerprints, but that alone cost it thousands in historical value. Charles sat in the study with the items laid out before him, a trembling hand running along the length of the dagger's sheath. His face was pale and drawn, and he hadn't spoken much since Felix's arrest. Elaine entered quietly and placed a teacup beside him. "He'll be sentenced next month," she said. "The Crown's building a strong case. Her father didn't look up. He was always a reckless boy, but I never thought he'd betray blood." Elaine sat beside him. He wasn't alone in that. Charles nodded slowly. "Your mother told me everything." A pause. Then, "I should have seen the signs. The debts. Her fear. But I was so obsessed with preserving the past, I didn't realize it was burning our present." Elaine said nothing. There was nothing to say. Later that afternoon, Margaret returned from the police station after signing a formal statement. She removed her coat and hung it like she did every day, her posture perfectly aligned, her chin high. But Elaine could see the cracks beneath the surface. "Will they press charges?" Charles asked from the armchair. "No," she said, voice barely audible. "They're treating it as negligence, not criminal intent. My cooperation helped, and your name stays out of it." Charles nodded. "Then it's done." But it wasn't done. Not really. That night, over dinner, the family sat in silence until Margaret reached out across the table and placed her hand over Elaine's. "I want to make it right," she said. "Truly. But I need you to understand. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was drowning. And no one saw me." Elaine swallowed a lump in her throat. "You could have told me. You didn't have to carry it alone." Margaret's smile was tired. "I didn't want you to think less of me." Elaine met her gaze. "I think more of you now. Because you tried, even if it was the wrong way." Upstairs, in her childhood room, Elaine lay awake as wind rattled the old leaded windows. The storm outside mirrored the one that had passed through their lives, leaving behind cracked trust and quiet reckoning. The next morning Detective Fenley returned, not in uniform, but with a plain envelope. Inside was a report. Elaine read it quietly. Felix had been involved in a string of similar thefts over the years, always small scale, always targeting distant relatives or isolated estates. No one had pressed charges, until now. He thought he could keep skating by on charm, Fenley said, but the walls were always closing in. "He's not insane," Elaine said flatly, "just selfish. And afraid." Fenley agreed. "He saw your family as a resource, not people." Elaine folded the report and looked out the window toward the tree line. "What happens to him now?" "Minimum 6 years," Fenley replied. "More, if they pursue restitution for the damages." He paused. "You did the right thing, turning over that violin, bringing this to light." Elaine nodded. "I just wish it hadn't cost so much." That evening, she joined her father in the study again. The collection had been restored to its cabinet, but this time it remained unlocked, an intentional decision. Charles stood before the glass, fingers ghosting over the violin. "I used to think these things gave us permanence," he said, "that if we held on to them tightly enough, we'd never disappear." Elaine glanced at the empty velvet slot where the astrolabe had once been. "And now, I think permanence is a myth. All we have is care, stewardship, and the hope that the people after us won't make the same mistakes." Elaine stepped closer. "You're still here. That means something." He gave a faint smile. "So are you." Days turned to weeks. The insurance settlement came through, though reduced. Margaret offered to sell one of her inherited properties to help pay off the remaining debts, and Charles, though hesitant, accepted. Trust, once splintered, began to mend. Elaine stood one afternoon on the back porch, watching Leo load logs into the shed. He glanced up and tipped his cap. "I'm sorry I was ever suspicious of you," she said. He grinned. "Wouldn't be the first time someone thought I was trouble. But you're not. Not anymore." She smiled, then turned back toward the house, toward its heavy doors and thick walls, and the echoing silence that no longer felt threatening, but healing. Ashgrove Hall still stood. Changed, yes, but alive. And for the first time in a long time, so was the family within.